Good evening, everyone. My name is Jen McHugh. Welcome to the Michener Art Museum virtual program, A Peek at Price. The artist Mary Elizabeth Price was best known for her metal leaf florals, floral panels, and screens. She was an advocate for the professionalization of women artists through her active involvement with groups like the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors, the Philadelphia 10, and the Plastic Club, granting greater exhibition opportunities for her peers in a largely male-oriented career. Tonight we will have Gerry and Marguerite Lenfest Chief Curator Laura Igoe and Assistant Curator Abi Lua will share some of the new research and discoveries they've found as they prepare for a 2027 exhibition on the artist, delving into individual artworks and her artistic network and career. So I hand it over to Laura and Abby.
Thanks so much, Jen. It's a pleasure to have you all here this evening. Thank you so much for being here. I know we are joined by members of the Price and Braden family. That's really exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback and thoughts and questions too, because I know that the family has been also very involved in doing research on Mary Elizabeth Price and her artistic family more broadly. So as Jen, I'm sorry, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Laura Igoe. I'm the Gerry and Marguerite Lenfest Chief Curator at the Michener. I'm joined today by Abi Lua, our Assistant Curator. And we, as Jen said, are going to be talking about Mary Elizabeth Price as we prepare for an upcoming exhibition in the fall of 2027. Right now, our dates are September 11th, 2027 until January 16th, 2028. So the exhibition would go through the winter as well. Our title for the exhibition currently is Under a Golden Sky, The Art and Advocacy of Mary Elizabeth Price. So this exhibition, we're hoping will shed new light on the career and work of Price and explore her unique approach to landscape and still life painting, her work's connection to the American Garden movement, and also her embrace of the decorative arts traditions. Price painted what many critics believe to be a feminine subject, and we see that sometimes in the press and people writing about her work, because she was especially well known for her floral still life. So you're looking at a detail of this right now. But her innovative application of metal leaf and simplified compositions really challenged assumptions of women's artistic practice during the early 20th century. We also plan in this exhibition to foreground her advocacy for the professionalization of women artists through her active involvement with groups like the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors, the American Women's Association, and the Philadelphia 10. She really was dedicated to granting greater exhibition opportunities for her peers in a largely male-oriented career. We're hoping this exhibition, or we're planning for this exhibition to feature approximately 40 works from private and public collections. A lot of Price's work is in private collections and in the families. It's owned by the family as well. And we hope to show some works that might be new to some people that might not know Price in great depth. We're also hoping to highlight, or planning to highlight archival material preserved by the artist's descendants that really underscore Price's tenacity, business acumen, and also dedication to art education and the professionalization of women artists, as I mentioned. So research for the show is still ongoing, but we wanted to share with you today some of our findings and some of our ideas about Price and her work. Well, I'm going to speak more about kind of Price's early career and also, again, her advocacy for women artists and art education. And then Abby's going to talk more about the metal leaf and floral panels and screens as well, and Price's connection with the decorative arts at the time. So again, I mean, I think many of you are probably familiar with Flower Border 1, Flower Border 2, which is in the Michener Art Museum's collection, currently on view in our galleries. Abby will be talking more about this piece and others like it later on. And then also a wonderful image of Price herself painting in her garden outside Pumpkin Seed Cottage near the Delaware River. So Price was born in 1877 in Martinsburg, West Virginia. She was born within a Quaker family, which there'll be some connections coming up with that soon. She moved at an early age to a farm in Solebury, Bucks County with her family. And she also attended Friends Central School, which is a Quaker school in Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia School of Industrial Arts. She also took courses at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. She especially studied still life painting, which I think is interesting. And she was there at PAFA at a time when Hugh Henry Breckenridge and also Daniel Garber were professors. And I'm showing you a later image of Garber teaching at the PAFA Country School in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania. She also studied privately with William Lathrop, who, of course, was working and living out at Phillips Mill and frequently took on students during the summer and in private lessons, and also really Lathrop was really, I think, as many of you know, the nexus or the center of the New Hope community at the time, where a lot of artists went to socialize. Price really was a part of a family of artists. Abby's going to talk a little bit later about Reuben Moore Price, Price's brother, who made frames and screens for Price's work. Reuben Moore Price married another painter, Elizabeth Friedley Price, and I'm showing you a work from the family's collection on the left. I don't have a lot of information about this painting, but I just think it's just such a different style than I think what we see from some of our Pennsylvania Impressionist painters. And Elizabeth Friedley Price eventually started painting more in an Impressionist style, but she started out in this kind of really amazing, almost abstract, very vibrant scene. That this kind of approach is what characterized her early work. Um, Alice Price, another artist, Price's sister, married Ray Sloane Braden. And here I'm showing you After the Rain from the Michener's collection by Braden. And then Price's other brother, Frederick Newland Price, also ran Farragill Art Galleries in New York City. Farragill is named for a combination of fair, meaning ferrous or iron, and argil or clay. So Farragill galleries dealt initially with wrought iron and sculpture, and eventually took on paintings and prints and focused on exhibitions of work by American artists. So they showed work by some artists you might recognize, like George Bellows, Thomas Hart Benton, Arthur Davies, Thomas Akins, and Grant Wood. And they also, Farragill Galleries also showed Pennsylvania Impressionists and work by Mary Elizabeth Price. And I should note here that she usually signed her work and went professionally as M. Elizabeth Price. I'm using that in my captions for her name. I know a lot of people call her Emmy Price. I hear that a lot as well. I might do a variation of different ways of referring to her throughout the talk. So here I'm showing you on the screen a catalog or a pamphlet from an early showing of Price's work at Farragill Galleries in 1917. And then this painting on the left, which is in a private collection, Windows, which is one of the works that was on view in the show. I love this painting in particular. This is not involving metal leaf, which comes she starts working with at a later date. But I think here, and I'll go to a kind of bigger image of it. But I think you still kind of get a sense of shimmering, especially from the way that the light is coming through in the windows of of the buildings in Philadelphia, and also in the street lamps below. I think she's still able to capture, she's still clearly, she's interested even at this early time at this play of light and luminosity within her work. I think that's really effective. So I'll get back to Windows in just a minute, but I'm also showing you on the left another early work in a private collection by Emmy Price called The Yellow Bowl from 1914. And this work is actually inscribed to Alice Price on occasion of her wedding to Ray Sloane Braden. So it has a really personal connection. Again, a floral without metal leaf quite yet. But again, there's still like kind of a shimmering quality, I think, to her work and the way she paints. So to go back to windows for a minute, this painting, again, a very urban scene. Perhaps for those of you who know Price for her florals, might not think of like her as as a painter of urban scenes. It's not necessarily what she's known for, at least today. But this was a night scene that was painted in Philadelphia, and what we're looking at here is Broad Street Station. which was the primary terminal for the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time in the city. And I'm showing you a historic photo of that building. I think you can see with the towers kind of like what she's trying to capture in her painting. This building was expanded by Frank Furness in the 1890s and then demolished in the early 1950s. So she's really, again, with this kind of vibrant night scene, capturing the hubbub and bustle of this important railroad station. So early on in Price's career, and I really enjoyed kind of learning about this material and reading these letters. She began correspondence with the preeminent collector Albert Barnes. Which again, I used to work at the Barnes Foundation, so this was really exciting for me to find or be or know about, excuse me. And we don't have the initial letter that Price or that sent to Barnes, or at least the initial we don't have information about like how they originally got in touch. But here I'm showing a letter that he sent to Price after clearly seeing some of her work and talking to her about it. And I'll just read some of it here because I know the print is small and might not be able for everyone to read. But it's dated September 29th, 1916. And Barnes says, "Dear Miss Price, this is a summary of what I tried to tell you." And everyone should know, if you don't already, that Barnes was very kind of gruff and to the point and would tell you his opinion in letter form or otherwise. So he says, "In my opinion, your work shows talent and is worth developing. But it shows also, in my opinion, one, lack of imagination, comparatively. Two, deficient sense of color, woefully. Three, influences, most banal academism of the prosaic literal spirit that is the very life and soul of the Delaware River School." So Albert Barnes was not a fan of Pennsylvania Impressionism. And I've made that very clear in his letter to Price. I think we can quibble with his critique of her work after just seeing a few of her earlier examples. Um, but he kind of encourages her to keep going and to do different things. He wants her to focus on her artwork and not be involved in other pursuits. She doesn't take his advice, and I'll talk a little in a minute about her. Oh, actually, what her response to that is in a later letter she writes back, and she says, "I have not yet found it possible to step out of the treadmill, but I greatly appreciate your kindly interest. I keep your letter to read over when I need a mental stimulant." So it clearly made a big impression on her at the time. And Price's letters with Barnes are some of the earliest letters that at least I've seen in her correspondence. And it helps us kind of track what she's doing, after she's taken some classes at PAFA and graduated from school, where she's ending up. Um, so she's clearly very interested in working with organizations that support education, art education specifically, and also opportunities for women. She later on in 1930, in a New York Sun article, talks about how it's important to her. She says, "There's nothing like creating your own competition." Um, so she really wanted other women artists to have opportunities and to kind of, jumpstart their careers or advance their careers. And she also wrote in that, or said in that same article, "It is a long, hard, and often tiresome job, but art appreciation is a hobby of mine and my firmest conviction as well. The only way to learn about art is to look at it. So when I first came to New York and was asked to arrange a showing of work of women painters in the Staten Island Museum, I agreed to do it, and I've been doing something of the sort every spare moment since." So she was an artist, but also a curator, and again, committed to working with women artists. So, going back to the letters to Barnes and some of the letterhead, I didn't include an image of this, but actually the first letter that we have that she wrote to Barnes is from December 1916. And the letterhead is the Brown College Preparatory School in Philadelphia. I'm still trying to do some more research on that, but that could possibly be a preparatory school affiliated with the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. So she's, perhaps working as an educator at that institution at that time. And then right now I'm showing you a letter from 1916 on the Philadelphia Young Friends Association letterhead. So this is a Quaker organization that was founded for the study and discussion of Quaker history and principles. And at the time, This organization was operating out of a building at 15th and Cherry Street, it was later called the Whittier. It included auditorium, committee rooms, offices, and rooms for long-term residents and visitors. So she was clearly doing something there. I don't know what exactly yet, but was involved again in this Quaker organization that was, um, advancing Quaker principles, but probably knowing at least many historic Quaker historic institutions, I'm sure was also involved in social issues as well and helping different communities in the city. So in 1917, Price moves to New York City. And by March 1918, her letterhead is from the Greenwich House, which was founded in 1902 to help New York's immigrant population adjust to life in a new country. So the Greenwich House offered programs in the arts, education, and social services. Its founder was the social reformer Mary Kingsbury Sinkovich, and she believed that exposure to and instruction in the arts was an effective way to create a sense of community among the diverse population that Greenwich House served. And this is very much like a part of the kind of the progressive movement in the United States and helping others that these women in particular considered to be less fortunate or needed some additional support. So Price came to the Greenwich House and helped establish the neighborhood art school. And soon after she moved there in 1917 and 1918. And the neighborhood art school worked very closely with public schools in the area to offer classes in wood carving, drawing, modeling, toy making, and pottery. And they offered life classes, so drawing from life or modeling from life, and also museum trips. And they she also helped establish an art committee, and you can see kind of a list of names on the side of this letterhead. So they were able to really bring in a lot of very illustrious names in the art world to be involved with this school. So some of the names you might see is John Sloan, Daniel Chester French, who was just featured in our recent Monuments and Myths exhibition, and Guy Penet Dubois, who was the one who really championed or at least wrote about Pennsylvania Impressionism as like the national school of this country. Um, Another name on this list, I'm going to skip ahead just a minute, is Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who funded a new building for Greenwich House and really supported the establishment of the art school. Whitney was a very important art patron, also a sculptor, and you might know her name because she is the namesake of the Whitney Museum in New York. So Price was really engaged with a lot of real movers and shakers in the New York art world almost immediately after moving there. Um, she wrote about the neighborhood art school in this journal called Touchstone. I'm also so in this article includes an image of a sculpture class at Greenwich House, and then also I have an image of Greenwich House pottery, which is still an active program at Greenwich House today, and Greenwich House pottery is pretty collectible. I think you can tell maybe by the name, by the kind of classes that were offered at the neighborhood art school, that the intention was really, I mean, Price was very much invested in these students learning about the arts, but there was also an interest in having these students learn like a skill that they could make things to sell. So like ceramics, toy making, like I said, so toys, wood carving. Were considered more like industrial arts, although there was classes in drawing and painting and things like that too. So Price writes about neighborhood art school, saying that the neighborhood art school is an experiment to stimulate interest in the fine arts and to foster and encourage the desire of the beautiful whenever it is discovered. Before America can really become a nation of craftsmen, the art instruction must free the mind, and by freedom, I mean a knowledge of how to use the individual imagination to carry one toward a definite goal. So she was very passionate about this kind of work. That's in a second. So in February of 1920, she writes again to Albert Barnes, and I've kind of been showing you some letterhead and skipping over some of this. In this one letter here, she talks about a lot of her letters are trying to get Barnes to come and join the art committee, participate in the school. Like she really wanted him to be involved or like at least to get his expertise and feedback. As Barnes was also very much interested in art education and wrote prolifically on that too. Um, but she wrote to him in February of 1920, and she, again, talking about the neighborhood art school, but she says, she talks about planning a trip to Europe in the summer. And she says Lucille Howard, who was another artist that is a member of the was a member of the Philadelphia 10 with her. But she said Lucille Howard is here 4 days each week. So Lucille Howard is also teaching at the neighborhood art school. She teaches at the School of Design on Fridays. I find her a great help. We have decided that our labors here are so strenuous and our time so completely used up to the exclusion of all else that we must make a trip somewhere this summer. It looks like France at the time, some quiet little villages to the south where one can forget everything but paint. It sounds alluring to me. End quote. So she goes to France and Italy that summer. And she spends some time based on the paintings that came out of that trip. We know she spent time in Brittany in France, in Guingamp, and also in Quimperlé. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the French. Quimperlé. And then she also went to Italy and went to Lake Como and Ravello on the Amalfi Coast. So it sounds like a wonderful trip to me. On the left is the wine shop from the Michener's collection. And then I'm showing a postcard that's from the family's Price Braden family collection, showing a similar scene, kind of scenes how from this around the same time period, showing how she's capturing this village of Quimperlé. And here's another similar view of Quimperlé, and then also the photograph showing the same church up on top of the hill there. And then when she came back to New York, she showed this work along with her Eleanor Abrams and Lucille Howard, who she traveled with and eventually shared a studio with in New York at Farragill Galleries as well. And so the title of this exhibition was Important Little Paintings of Italy and France. I'm showing you, along with Wine Shop, this painting by Lucille Howard, which this is a guess. I was looking at the list of paintings in that show, and there is a painting by Lucille Howard that was included called Sunday Morning Quimperlé. I found this painting online and it sold at auction and it had a different title, just more generic, like Street Scene or something like that. But I think you can tell by the kind of the hat or the what the woman's wearing on her head. This is very similar to what Breton people were wearing in Brittany at the time, and that's something that artists really love to capture. Is the dress of people that were living in Brittany. You might think of like Vincent van Gogh, for example. And these were all, again, small paintings. To me, I wonder if they were painted, directly from life. I think they were. These artists were painting from life abroad, and with a smaller canvas, they're like a little easier to travel with and bring back home with them. So Price continued to have a presence in New York. This painting on the left is just one example of another New York scene she painted called 57th Street Window. And she also have a letter here to her brother Frederick Newland Price from where the address again is on West 57th Street. She did have a studio at 10 East 9th Street, where she shared with Abrams and Howard. I suspect this is where she lived. She did have several of her stretchers, including flower borders in our collection, have the 140 West 57th Street inscribed on the stretcher bars. So that was clearly a place where she had presence. And she was very much involved in the Philadelphia 10 from about 1921 to 1945. I'm showing you a letter that also has the 10 letterhead on it. And so in one letter that I read from her to Frederick Newland Price, she's like clearly like kind of, trying to figure out new members. And like she writes about how the sculptor Joan Hartley is withdrawing from the 10. And she wrote to Frederick Newland Price that we want a Philadelphia member so that she will do part of the work. So that the Philadelphia 10 very much based in Philadelphia, but there were some New York artists that were involved in that group that were exhibiting together across the country. But I like this idea that like we need somebody local so they can like do some of the logistics and organization. Um, she does say something to the effect of like Hallie Davis, who I don't know her work very well, was suggested. And then Price says, I question her ability to contribute. We may elect a painter instead. Those pesky sculptors, they just, hard to corral. She also was a founding member of the Phillips Mill Community Association. I think Abby's going to talk more about that later. And then from 1920 to 1927, she was the chair of exhibits at the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors. And in that capacity, she arranged exhibits for women artists across the US and in South America and even in Hawaii. And as those quotes that I kind of said earlier, she really loved doing that kind of curatorial work. And it was something that she was really committed to throughout her career. Um, One kind of find that I made that I don't think I've seen in scholarship before is that I was reading, well, I had been reading about Price and this reference to these murals at the American Women's Association clubhouse. And I had seen written references to it, but hadn't seen any images of these murals. And I was able to connect with Barnard College Archives, which owns or takes care of the archives for the American Women's Association, and was able to get more information on the murals, which is exciting. And I'll share it with you for the first time. I think that many people have seen these before. So Price was the chair of the art committee at the American Women's Association when these murals were debuted or painted in 1931. This is a group of the artists, members of the American Women's Association. I, for the life of me, cannot figure out if any of these people are Price. I'm sure one of them is Price. And if the family has any idea, I'm happy to share the image. Love to know more. I feel like most of the images we have of Price are when she's older, and it's kind of hard to maybe pick her out of this group, but I suspect she's in there. So here are some images of these murals. And so Price painted these or designed these with Lucille Howard. And they were made for both the junior lounge and the junior ballroom, which I'll show you in a little bit, at the American Women's Association Clubhouse on 57th Street. They were made using tempera on canvas, and then there was a wax coating applied to the murals to preserve them. They are no longer extant. As far as I know, I'd love to find them, but I don't, they're not in this building anymore. And these murals for the junior lounge were inspired by samplers. And so I read some press, kind of talking about these murals. And it's clear that Price and Howard were thinking about traditional women's work, and needlework specifically, and wanting to incorporate that into a women's association. I imagine they were also thinking about maybe, the history of women's art more broadly, and maybe how they can make a connection with their own work. Of course, they're painting on these, like each little stitch. It's not actual needlework. But just really remarkable being able to see these murals. And some of the feedback or some of the press, some of the quotes from the press that I can share. One journal or one newspaper said, even the mottos that used to be stitched into those venerable samplers seem edged with satire, considering the philosophy of 20th century youth, end quote. And I've been thinking about that quote a lot. Like, are these satirical? I'm not sure. I think you can see there's underneath the ship here, you see a quote, which is, content is all we aim at with with all our store. She that has that with little needs no more. I also want that same newspaper also talks about these two roosters over the doorway and say that they symbolize rivalry over the archway connecting the two junior lounges. And here's another example of one of the murals, and it's hard, it's cut off, so I can't see the whole saying. We'll go back to that in a minute. But we know that Howard and Price were looking to historic sampler examples. And Abby pulled this from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection. So thank you, Abby, for finding this work. But it's clear that they were like this sampler was an inspiration for this mural specifically. But they've added this text again with these messages. I don't know if they were meant to be kind of playful or ironic, or if they were actually meant to have some kind of moralizing message for the junior members of the American Women's Association. But pretty fascinating. These are also, I should say, the murals were in color. So this is a black and white reproduction, but they would have been colored too. I can only imagine, how bright they might have been, and if they actually copied some of the colors in the actual sampler. And then in terms of the ships, I haven't been able to find yet like a direct comp for the ship design. There must be a sampler out there that has that. I'd love if anyone knows, please let me know. And Abby will talk about this a little bit as well, but Price did paint like these kind of galleons or like big sailing ships. So that was an interest of hers as well. I should also note that these photographs of the murals were taken by the photographer Bernice Abbott, which might be a recognizable name to some of you. She was an important photographer in New York at this time and actually shot a lot of like science-based imagery, but shot New York scenes and also portraits of kind of New York luminaries. So I thought that was so cool that she also shot took these photographs of the murals. And then the ballroom. So there were two panels in the ballroom that show like a Victorian garden party is how they were described in another in the junior ballroom, sometimes also called the lounge. Um, and these were about 30 feet long and 6.5 feet high. You can see how they're kind of above it's like above the line of the chairs and sofas in this room. And they were described in the New York newspaper as, quote, using a kind of long stroke pointillism, which provides a sparkling effect consonant with the note of informal gaiety appropriate to rooms of this sort, end quote. So I haven't found a lot of information about, why these exactly were selected. I think they were thinking about the audiences of these spaces and what they might like to see, or I think the samplers, they were thinking about women's work or women's art in a what would be considered more historic period. But then this is kind of very playful and sort of fanciful. If there are events and balls and other things happening in this space, they're clearly trying to, echo that or emulate that. Here's another image of that one mural. And then I also, thinking about the style of these works, and I think you see this again, the newspaper that I quoted earlier called it a pointillist style, but these kind of like long dashes of color, of paint, makes me think of Robert Spencer's work. I don't know exactly how much connection that Price might have had with Spencer, but he also painted in this similar way with like these kind of dashes of color that Price employed frequently in her work too. So this was clearly something that was happening within the New Hope School of Painters as well. And now I think I've talked enough, and I'm going to turn it over to Abby.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. As Laura mentioned, my name is Abby, and I am the assistant curator here at the Michener. And so I just wanted to end my presentation with an object analysis. And so we know, so for specifically with the panels, we know a lot about these works. I know at our museum, these floral borders are a beloved work of art in our Putman Smith Gallery. But at the same time, we don't know too much. And how I wanted to introduce this is through a letter that Price had written to the art dealer Maynard Walker. And so if you can go to the next slide, Laura. So in this letter, she writes about different works that she's thinking of submitting to different artist shows. So she's really thinking about different logistics of where to move her art and which works of art. And so in this letter, she mentions Cheerful Barge, which is pictured here. She's thinking about submitting it to the Allied Artists Show at the Brooklyn Museum. And then next slide. She also mentions the Royal Family of Bruges as another possibility for a different art show. And she just goes on to write more about different logistics of moving her art, including one with the Philadelphia 10. And so she just keeps going on. And then eventually she hits this reflection on her gold medal leaf works. And about them, she writes, I had just about decided not to do any more in my gold leaf style because no one seemed to care. And the use of the gold leaf seemed to rank them a little lower than pure paint. But if I get the least little bit of encouragement, I suppose I'll go at it again. Next slide. So perhaps as you can tell, she must have received more encouragement about her gold leaf panels because she has made much more. And now today, I would argue that this is the type of work that she is most known for today. And so again, like I said, these works and especially these border panels are very beloved in our museum and to our audience. But then what I really wanted to focus on is really unpack these objects more. I think not necessarily familiarity breeds contempt because we also love this work, but there really is so much more to unpack with Price's artistry and her works of art. And not only is there much more to unpack, but as we really gather these stories, we can see how Price's techniques and her works connects us to larger art histories. And so next slide. And so the way that I wanted to break down this object analysis was to really think about three topics of her panels and her screens. So the first one I'll touch upon is her application and her technique of using gold medal leaf. The second one that I'll touch upon is her subject matter of flowers and why and how she painted many flowers in these screens specifically. And then the third section that I'll end with is on decorative arts. So really thinking about these panels as decorative arts objects and not just as paintings. Next slide. And so to begin with talking about or analyzing these panels with regards to her use of gold medal leaf, as Laura mentioned, during the 1920s, she travels to Europe with Lucille Howard and Eleanor Abrams. And during that trip, she went to Italy. And why this is important is because during that trip, we can assume that she picked up, or it's well known that her use of gold medal leaf is inspired by the technique of gilding that was done in Renaissance Italy, and specifically Siena, Italy, the city of Siena. And so the city of Siena was an important city of artistic innovation during the Italian Renaissance. It's positioned alongside Florence, which is well known to have been a site of artistic innovation for the Renaissance. If you're aware and are familiar with different events going on in the art world currently, you might know that the Metropolitan Museum of Art recently curated a show on paintings, specifically these golden paintings in Siena. And the premise of the show was just that in addition to Florence, Siena was an important city for the rise of painting during Renaissance Italy. And so Price really applied the technique that was done there in the Renaissance for her floral panel screens. And so you could see here two examples of these Sienese works. And these were included in the exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so during my research, I was able to find an article that recorded just exactly what this Sienese process was like. And so the way that she applied metal leaf and that it had been done in Siena as well, was first that artists had applied gold leaf onto a surface with a mixture or like alternating mixtures of a ground of red clay. And then on top of that, white gesso, and then it would be alternating layers. And then So on top of that would be the gold leaf. And then once the gold leaf or the metal was applied, then she would paint figures and flowers. One key difference that was noted was that instead of so when you have the surface of white gesso and red clay, instead of just putting the metal leaf on, which was done during Renaissance Italy, she would actually paint the silver or gold leaf on with oil paint. And so if you can go to the next slide, Laura. So we saw this painting earlier, but I just wanted to emphasize that it wasn't just for her floral screens and panels that she began employing this technique, but she was also starting to do that with works like Galleon. So you can see the sky is this really beautiful golden sky. And so for future research, I would like to see how this is really done. I think just reading it on text, I can't really visualize what it looks like to gild in this manner. But I'm hoping to really learn that from like an experiential point of view. Next slide. And then for the second part of the object analysis, I'll be talking about her flowers and just contextualizing them. So first, I'll contextualize them within the larger school of Pennsylvania Impressionism. And then I'll talk about the intersection of these flowers with the American Garden movement. And so next slide. And so as many of you might already know, Price was trained within, she was trained and she also just grew up within a very artistic environment in New Hope with the Pennsylvania Impressionists. Though she was born in West Virginia, she moved with her family at an early age to Salisbury in Bucks County and received her education in the region, as Laura had shared earlier. And so, as you can probably tell, she received a lot of artistic influence from the surrounding environment. And you can see that in the technique. So as Laura mentioned, she had this sort of like, gestural brushstrokes, specifically with, repeated dashes and whatnot, which is very typical of Impressionist paintings. But then you can also see it with the subject matter. And so again, we have cheerful barge on the left. But then you also have, the canal, the Delaware Canal is a very common subject for a lot of the Pennsylvania Impressionists. And so on the right, I have an example of a canal painting done by Edward Redfield, except during the winter. The next slide. And then as Laura had already mentioned, again, within this artistic community, she was really trained within the New Hope School. So when she was at PAFA, she studied with artists Daniel Garber and Hugh Breckenridge, and you can see Daniel Garber's work to the right there. And so it was not only in her training and her studies that she was connected to these artists. In her career, she later remained connected, as Laura mentioned. She, along with Fern Coppage, Ray Sloan Braden, Garber, John Follansbee, Edward Redfield, and Walter Schofield. With these artists, she founded Phillips Mill, which continues to be an important visual art center for our region today. And so you can see that her penchant for painting flowers in this style is influenced in part by this artistic environment and upbringing. And then next slide. But not only can we attribute this penchant for painting flowers to the larger school of Pennsylvania Impressionism, but at the same time, there is this movement happening with gardening. So during at the turn of the 21st century, as industrialization was growing, growing and increasing popularity was this middle-class leisure pursuit of gardening. And so many middle-class homes started cultivating their own gardens. And you really see that popping up through the early part of the 20th century. But not only were gardens popping up, but these artists, specifically American Impressionists, were drawing from their gardens subject matter for their paintings. And so the American Impressionists like Daniel Garber and Hugh Breckenridge would go to their gardens and draw a lot of inspiration for their floral paintings from these gardens. And so you see these two movements aligned. It's got horticultural movement as well as a painting movement. And so Price was no exception. So pictured here is Pumpkin Seed Cottage. This was her home in New Hope. So in the 1920s, she began renting it with her brother, Frederick Newland Price, or Fred. And eventually they purchased it in 1929. So on the left in the slide is a postcard-sized sketch that's included in her archives. And then on Zillow, you can find her home. And so that is what you see on the right. It's a very charming home. And then next slide. And then she lived along the Delaware River Canal, and that bridge in the background that you see both in the photo on the right as well as in the card is Rabbit Run Bridge. And so she really, painted her home landscape. And so I bring these images of her home because it was here at her home that she also kept a garden. And so I thought a small painting that kind of explains it all is featured on the next slide. And so again, this is also in her archives. It's a very sweet little card. And reference to her home can be seen in that mailbox with FN Price, her brother, and then her name, Emmy Price. But then below it are these really charming flowers. And so we can tell that, Price really tended to her garden. Her garden was there. She drew inspiration from it. In one letter to her brother, she writes, "I have been up there Sundays, there being the Pumpkin Seed Cottage. This last Sunday, I sat out in the field almost all day drawing brown-eyed Susans. It was a perfect day for painting with all those weeds and rolling hills and clouds." So again, just to recap, the flowers really are a display of her training and influenced by the Pennsylvania School of Impressionism, but as well as her personal participation in the American Garden movement. And then next slide. And so finally, for our third section of this object analysis, I wanted to think about these works as decorative art objects that have a function. So they're not just paintings to be hung on a wall. And in addition to that, really thinking of what it means for Price to be a craftsperson. And so as Laura mentioned earlier, Price had a brother named Reuben Moore. And it is well known that he was the one who often crafted the frames and the screens for her panels. And so you can see examples of those here. The next slide. But I also wanted to contextualize her brother's technique and expertise in making frames within the larger context of craft and frame making in Bucks County. And so it wasn't just men like Reuben Moore who were making frames, but pictured here, you can see on the right, frames that were made by Bernard Badura. And then if you can go back, or no, not go back, go forward, yes. Perfect. And again, we have galleons here, and I bring this up because actually the frame that the painting rests in is a frame that's made by Frederick Hare. And so the stories that we've been telling currently in our galleries is that when Pennsylvania Impressionism is really intertwined with the decorative arts, often painters like Price and Daniel Garber, Edward Redfield, they would send their paintings to be framed by these framemakers, Bernard Badura and Frederick Hare. But not only are we trying to tell this story, but we also wanted to really emphasize that decorative arts in the region really began with frame making. And so you can see both of those stories really come together in Price's panels and her screens. And then next slide. But then I also wanted to emphasize that this connection between Pennsylvania Impressionism and craft can be found in the artist herself. And so pictured here on above is a wood block. Yes, a wood block that is carved by Price, and it was used as her letterhead. So you can see it printed below. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see the letterhead in action. And so pictured there on the left is the letterhead. And actually, Laura, if you could go back just to explain more of what you can see here. So the letterhead is a depiction of the Pumpkin Seed Cottage as well as New Hope. And so if you can see on the right is her cottage. And then as you go towards the left, you see the bridge, Rabbit Run Bridge, and then you land at New Hope there on the left. And so if you can go back to the next slide. And so what I wanted to really drive home with this slide is that because Price was already in this context of Pennsylvania Impressionism and craft, it was really neat to see how this woodblock really represented both sides in one object, and really represents her as being her own craftsperson, apart from her brother and men like Hare and Badura. So next slide. And then the last bit of thinking about Price as a craftsperson and these objects as decorative arts objects, I really wanted to think about the screen as a genre of art, and really through that use it as the point of departure for thinking about her work cross-culturally. And so in other words, the screen is not just any decorative art object, but specifically a Japanese art object or Japanese inspired. And so pictured on the right is a screen by Ogata Korin called Irises at Yatsuhashi. And so if you even, yeah, right, it's floral. It also employs gold leaf. And so you could see the parallels there. And then if you go to the next slide, I included these images because I wanted to further couch this comparison within this larger movement that is happening in American and European art. And so during the 18th, 19th centuries, there's an influx of inspiration from Japanese art onto American and European art styles and art subjects and material. And this term is called Japanisme. And so it's everything from Japanese printmaking and its influence on American and European printmaking. And so Mary Cassatt is a really classic example of how her prints are indebted to Japanese printmaking, like the ukiyo-e print. And then on the right is an example of Japanning. So in Japan, this ebony type furniture is called lacquerware. And lacquerware is a type of resin from a specific tree in East Asia, in Japan. The furniture makers would use as varnish over furniture. And the furniture makers in the West were so enamored by it that they tried to copy it, but they didn't have this tree. And so they would use other types of, black or dark varnish to imitate the objects. And so really across visual art and decorative arts, there was this look towards, or, there is this glance towards Japan. And so we see that with screens as well. And so if you can go to the next slide, we see that Japanese screens are, beginning to be displayed in American interiors in the 1900s. And so pictured here on the left is the home of architect Frank Lloyd Wright in Wisconsin. And it's kind of blurry, but the screen is on the left of the image, sitting right above that cushion, that bed. And so you can see the panels there. And on the right is an image of a Japanese screen at the Victor Jorgensen House in Portland, Oregon. And so I want to emphasize that these are actually Japanese screens, but then you find that artists are making their own screens of sort. And so if we can go to the next slide. Ooh, next slide. Perfect. Oops. We can also contextualize or situate Price's screens within local expressions of this particular Japanese screen. And so pictured here is a screen. Laura just showed this to me today, and my mind is blown. It's a screen that's made by Eleanor Abrams, again, her studio mate, travel mate, and it's called Underwater Garden. So you can see even within her own circle of artists, there are other artists who are making screens like this. And then next slide. If we take one step further into the larger circle of Pennsylvania Impressionists, we have here Ethel Wallace's screen of a medieval celebration. And you can see here a similar employment of gold leaf. And again, for our Michener visitors, this might be familiar to you as we just exhibited it. And then one more slide. Taking another step forward, again, Laura showed this to me, but this is a screen by Humbert Howard. And he likely did not at least as far as I know, did not have any connection with Mary Elizabeth Price. But he was a local Philadelphia artist, as some of you may know, director of the Pyramid Club, and yeah, he was well known for still life painting, urban scenes, but he also painted the screen. And so you can really see the layer right within Price's immediate circle, the larger circle of Pennsylvania Impressionism, and then, at large, the Delaware Valley region, screens, this Japanese object, this typology is being reproduced in different ways. And the next slide. This is my last slide. To close, I just wanted to make this comparison. It's the biggest stretch of the evening, but I thought it was really cool, and I wanted to just share it as a way to wrap up my reflections on cross-cultural influence. And so to bring it back to Price's flower borders that's pictured on the left, I wanted to compare it to this screen by Chucho Reyes called Biombo, Aves y Flores. And so this screen is made by a Mexican modernist artist. And as you can see, there are a lot of visual similarities. You can see the use of gold and, that floral branch, right? And the birds, it's just so similar. But really, there's no connection at all, apart from the visual similarities. To my knowledge, I highly doubt that Price knew Reyes and vice versa. I don't even know if they were aware. But independently, this screen by Chucho Reyes has its own parallel trajectory of cross-cultural influence. To really bring it back to the 15th century, Mexico and Asia were connected by this, 300-year trade network that Spain operated called the Manila Galleon. And for Mexico, it brought Asian goods into the country. And one of those goods were Japanese screens. And so really as early as the 16th, 17th century, these screens are being brought to Mexico. And not only were they being brought, but eventually these screens were thought of as Mexican. So actually the term biombo, it is a Spanish word, but it came from the Japanese word for screen, which is byobu, which is B-Y-O-B-U. And so it became Hispanicized with the word biombo and just became this Mexican genre of art. And so these screens became their own typology and culturally hybrid. And so, fast forward to the 20th century, we have a screen like this that develops into its own, within Mexican art at large. And so again, very similar color palette, very similar flowers, not connected at all. But I wanted to use it as the point of reflection to see how Price's screen, like Chucho Reyes' screen, is just a product of this larger cross-cultural influence and a product of early modern globalization that, expands Price's panels, beyond the Delaware Valley region. And so that is my object analysis for the evening. And that is all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby, for all of this. Some of which we talked about, and some of which I'm seeing for the first time too, which is wonderful. I also would just want to we'll take some questions. I know we're running right up on time, but we can stay later and answer a few questions too. I also just want to thank the Braden Price family. Most of the archives that we've showed in this talk and some of the artwork come from the family. And so we're really grateful for the access that they've provided for that. Jen, I don't know if you want to moderate questions. I'm happy to do it too.
If you want to do it, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, but I can bring back the screen because I can't. It's hard for me for some reason to see both. Alice asks, I love the Ethel Wallace connection. Any idea whether Mary Elizabeth Price and Ethel Wallace knew each other? Do you have any insight, Abby?
I have no insight that can give a definitive answer. Because I'm actually it is interesting though, because Ethel Wallace was also working in New York, and I wonder if they could have, maybe there was some mutual connection, but to my knowledge so far, I'm not sure if they were ever directly connected.
Yeah, I would like to know more about that. Alice, I think it's a great question. I think the way that Ethel Wallace applied the gold leaf in that screen is very different than how Price was using gold leaf. It's like less of a layered effect and more kind of uniform. But just the fact that she was using gold leaf in that way, I think is interesting. I'd also like to know more about Price's relationship with Fern Coppage, another beloved Philadelphia 10 painter living in the New Hope area, but I haven't seen any correspondence yet or anything between them. They must have known each other, Price and Coppage, but I um, have not found any kind of like archival evidence of interaction between them. Any other questions? And you can put in questions in the Q&A if you have them. Yeah, someone points out with regards to Price knowing Spencer, their houses are very close together. Very true. Thank you. Can't imagine they did not meet. I'm sure they did know each other. Yeah, I do think the similarities and their application of paint I think is really interesting. Yeah, but so, I mean it was a small, very close-knit community. So yes. Any other questions? I can ask maybe Abby. Abby, what's something like, I don't know, what was your in the research that you did and the kind of archives you've been looking through, what was your like favorite thing you learned about Price
Oh
that
God,
you didn't kind of know jumping into this project?
I didn't know jumping in. Um, I think learning about the her gold metal leaf technique actually was really neat because I didn't realize that it was pretty well known during her time too that these were the specific techniques and steps to applying the gold
Mhm.
leaf. And I think just also reading her letters has been fun. She's sort of snippy. I don't know if snippy is the right word, but it was really neat to see her relationship with her brother in those letters.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, we have a
That's
note.
great. We do. It's from Barbara. And please do send more photos and pictures to, you can send them to me, Barbara. You have my email, and I'll share them with Abby too. Thank you so much. Again, thank you. I mean, it's wonderful when you're working on an artist whose descendants or family has really preserved archives the work and documented it in such a thoughtful and organized way. And so I'm very appreciative. Um, Barbara, yes, there will be a show. Sorry, there will be a show. Sorry, there'll be a catalog for the show. Thank you. Thanks for that question. And Abby and I are going to be writing essays for that catalog, and we're hoping to include some really amazing images of Price's work too. Alice also asks, are any of the current family members artists? That I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to chime in, family that are involved. And Eric says he would love to see a talk on Daniel Garber. Noted. Any other questions? Well, both Abby and I, our emails are available on the Michener Art Museum's website. If you have any follow-up questions or things you want to share with us about Price or otherwise, please send us a message. We'd love to hear from you all. Okay.
Thank you very much, Laura and Abby. That was fascinating. I know I always enjoy seeing the price panels, and I can't wait to see more of the works that you bring out for this show. Thank you everyone for attending. This was recorded, and I will send out a link to everyone that registered. Um, and Barbara Tinker just said the cheerful barge is seen from the door of Pumpkin Seed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's amazing. Love these little tidbits that we get from the families. Anyway, as I was saying, we will be sending out the link. This was recorded. We have lots of amazing programming coming up. So be sure to check out our website. And I think that's it. So thank you for tuning in and hope to see you at the Michener soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jen. Thanks, Abby. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.